Have you ever reached the end of a long day and thought, why am I so tired when I didn't do anything that actually mattered? You were busy. You answered messages. You showed up. You said yes, again and again. But the one thing you wanted to do, the thing that would have moved your life forward, never happened. If that feels uncomfortably familiar, good, because this story is about you. And more importantly, it's about the quiet power that can completely change your life. The power of saying no. Now wait, before your brain jumps in and says, yeah, but I don't have that luxury, or if I say no, I'll disappoint people, or that's selfish. Hold that thought, because here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. You're not overwhelmed because you have too much to do. You're overwhelmed because you've agreed to too much that doesn't matter. And nobody teaches us how to deal with that. We're raised to believe that more is better. More opportunities, more connections, more hustle, more commitments. Busy becomes a badge of honor. Exhaustion becomes proof you're trying hard enough. But Greg McKeown in Essentialism drops a quiet bomb on this entire belief system. He says, if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. And suddenly, everything makes sense. Because look at your life right now. Your calendar? Probably full. Your to-do list? Overflowing. Your mental energy? Gone by noon. You're making progress, just not in the direction you actually care about. That's not failure. That's living as a non-essentialist. A non-essentialist believes, I have to do it all. It's all important. I'll rest later. An essentialist asks a completely different question. What is absolutely essential? And what am I willing to let go of? And that question? That's where the hero's journey begins. Because every meaningful transformation starts with awareness. Right now, you're standing at the edge of a crossroads. One path keeps you busy forever. The other gives you your life back. But here's where it gets real. Choosing the essentialist path doesn't start with doing more. It starts with doing less. And that sounds terrifying, because saying no feels like rejection. It feels like closing doors. It feels like risking judgment. But what if saying no isn't rejection at all? What if it's alignment? What if every time you say yes to something unimportant, you're quietly saying no to the life you actually want? That's the hidden cost nobody talks about. Every yes is a trade-off. Time for one thing means time taken from another. And most people never consciously choose those trades. They just drift. They let urgency decide. They let other people's priorities decide. They let fear decide. Essentialism is about taking that power back. But first, you have to slow down. And I know, slowing down feels irresponsible in a world that rewards speed. But here's the paradox. The fastest way forward is to pause. Essentialists don't rush into action. They create space to think. Because clarity doesn't come from motion. It comes from stillness. And this is where most people resist. They're afraid that if they stop moving, everything will fall apart. But let me ask you something. Has constantly moving actually been working? Or has it just kept you distracted from asking the hard questions? Questions like, what actually matters to me? What am I doing out of obligation? What would I remove if I wasn't afraid? This is the moment in the story where the hero realizes the old way isn't working. Not because they're weak, but because they're finally ready to be honest. And honesty is dangerous, because once you see what matters, you can't unsee it. And once you see what doesn't matter, you have a responsibility to let it go. But here's the twist most people don't expect. Saying no doesn't shrink your life. It expands it. Because every no creates space, and space is where clarity lives. Space is where focus grows. Space is where meaningful work actually happens. But knowing this is one thing. Doing it, that's where courage comes in. And in the next part, we're going to talk about the most uncomfortable skill of all. How to say no without guilt, without burning bridges, and without losing yourself. Trust me, this is where everything starts to change. Here's the part nobody warns you about. Once you finally get clear on what matters, the hardest work begins, because clarity doesn't magically clean up your calendar. It confronts it, and suddenly you see it. Meetings you don't need to be in, projects that no longer serve you, commitments you said yes to out of fear, guilt, or habit. And that's when the anxiety kicks in. Because knowing what to remove is one thing, actually removing it, that feels risky. This is where most people retreat. They think, I'll just push through. I'll deal with this later. It's not that bad. But essentialism isn't about coping better with overload. It's about eliminating it at the source. Greg McKeown says something that stings a little. Greater than, if it isn't a clear yes, it's a clear no. Read that again. Not maybe. Not I'll think about it. Not sure, why not? If it's not a clear yes, it's a no. And immediately your mind starts protesting. What if I miss an opportunity? What if they think I'm difficult? What if I regret it? This fear has a name. FOMO. Fear of missing out. But essentialists understand a deeper truth. Every time you say yes to something non-essential, you are missing out on something essential. You just don't feel it right away. The cost shows up later. As burnout. As resentment. As a quiet sense that your life doesn't belong to you. Now here's the reframe that changes everything. Saying no isn't about rejecting people. It's about honoring priorities. You're not saying, you don't matter. You're saying, this matters more. And that distinction changes how no feels. Because a thoughtful no is actually an act of respect. It's honest. It's clean. It doesn't create false expectations. McKeown calls this the graceful no. Not over-explaining. Not apologizing excessively. Not justifying your existence. Just clarity. Something like, I can't commit to that right now. That's not something I can take on. I'm focusing on fewer priorities this season. Simple. Calm. Direct. And here's the surprising part. Most people respect it. They may not like it, but they respect it. Because deep down everyone knows what it feels like to be stretched too thin. Now let's talk about the trap that keeps people stuck longer than anything else. The sunk cost fallacy. This is the voice that says, I've already invested so much time. I can't quit now. I've come too far. But essentialists ask a brutal question. If I weren't already committed, would I say yes to this today? If the answer is no, then staying is costing you more than leaving. Time doesn't become valuable because you already spent it. It becomes valuable when it leads somewhere meaningful. And sometimes the most powerful move forward, is stepping away. This applies to projects, relationships, habits, even identities. Because not everything that once served you deserves a permanent place in your life. This is where essentialism stops being productivity advice and becomes personal growth. You're no longer just managing tasks, you're editing your life. Think of yourself as an editor. An editor doesn't add more words to improve a story. They remove what doesn't belong. They cut scenes that distract. They delete paragraphs that dilute the message. Not because those words were bad, but because they weren't essential. Your life works the same way. More doesn't create meaning. Focus does. But here's the moment where most people hesitate, because cutting things out feels like loss, and loss triggers grief. You grieve the version of yourself that said yes to everything, the version that wanted to be needed, the version that believed busyness meant worth. Letting go of that identity is uncomfortable. But on the other side of that discomfort is freedom, Freedom to breathe, freedom to think, freedom to give your best energy to the few things that truly matter. And here's the quiet irony. When you do less but better, your impact increases. You show up more present, more focused, more alive. Because you're no longer scattered across 1,000 obligations. You're grounded. But we're not done yet. Because even after you say no, even after you eliminate, there's one more challenge most people never anticipate: execution. How do you actually follow through on what matters without falling back into chaos? That's where essentialism becomes a system, not just a mindset. And that's what we're diving into next. Because clarity without execution is just a nice idea. Here's the mistake most people make. They finally get clear. They finally say no. They finally decide what matters. And then they try to execute it, using willpower. They tell themselves, I'll just try harder. I'll stay disciplined this time. I won't slip back. And for a while, it works. Until life happens. A bad night of sleep. An unexpected meeting. A stressful week. And suddenly everything collapses. Greg McKeown calls this out clearly. Essentialism is not about effort, it's about design. If something important requires constant motivation, your system is broken. Essentialists don't ask, how can I push myself to do this? They ask, how can I make this easier to do than not do? That question changes everything, because instead of fighting friction, you remove it. Let's talk about the first tool, buffers. Most people plan as if nothing will go wrong. They schedule meetings back to back. They pack their days to the minute. They assume perfect energy, perfect focus, perfect conditions. And then reality hits. A task takes longer than expected. Someone interrupts. Your brain just isn't there that day. Now you're behind. Now you're stressed. Now everything feels urgent. Essentialists plan differently. They assume life will happen. So they build buffers. If something should take 30 minutes, they schedule 45. If a project feels manageable, they add margin anyway. Not because they're lazy, but because they're realistic. A buffer isn't wasted time, it's protection. Protection from panic, protection from rushing, protection from burning out. And here's the irony. People who plan buffers actually get more done, because calm execution beats frantic productivity every time. Now let's talk about routine. Willpower is a terrible long-term strategy. It's unreliable, it fluctuates, it disappears under stress. Routines, on the other hand, are automatic. Once something becomes a habit, it no longer negotiates with your mood. You don't debate brushing your teeth, you just do it. Essentialists turn their most important work into rituals. Same time, same place, same setup. No decision fatigue, no mental resistance, because every decision you don't have to make is energy saved for what truly matters. This is why successful people often look boring. They eat similar meals. They follow predictable schedules. They remove unnecessary choices. Not because they lack creativity, but because creativity needs structure to thrive. Now here's where most people sabotage themselves again. They try to do everything at once. They want the full transformation. Right now. New habits, new goals, new identity. And when they can't maintain it, they conclude something is wrong with them. Essentialism rejects that approach. Instead, it focuses on small wins, tiny progress, minimum viable effort, not because small goals are inspiring, but because they're sustainable. A small win today beats a perfect plan tomorrow. McKeown emphasizes this over and over. Momentum comes from progress, not ambition. Once you start moving, your confidence grows. Once your confidence grows, your capacity expands, and suddenly, what once felt overwhelming feels manageable. Now let's zoom out for a moment, because this isn't just about productivity. This is about ownership. If you don't deliberately choose what matters, someone else will choose for you. Your boss, your inbox, other people's expectations, and slowly, your life fills up with priorities that were never yours. Essentialism is the act of taking your life back, not dramatically, not all at once, but intentionally. One decision at a time, one no at a time, one protected hour at a time, until one day you realize something quietly powerful. You're no longer reacting, you're directing, and that shift changes everything. Your work feels lighter, your mind feels clear, your energy stops leaking in every direction, because instead of chasing everything, you're committing to something. Now let's bring this home. Ask yourself this: if I could only make progress on one thing this week, what would make everything else easier or irrelevant? That question is the heart of essentialism, not what do I need to do, but what deserves my best. Because you don't need more time, you don't need more discipline, you don't need more motivation, you need fewer priorities, chosen intentionally. And here's the truth most people avoid. You can do anything, but you cannot do everything. The moment you accept that, you stop feeling behind. You stop chasing approval. You stop living in reaction mode, and you start building a life that actually fits you. But there's one final realization McKeown leaves us with, one that ties everything together, and it's not about doing less, it's about living better. Let's close this journey properly.
Let's end with the hardest truth in this entire book. If you don't choose what matters most, you'll be forced to react to what matters least. That's not a motivational quote. That's a law of life. Every yes you give is a trade. Time for money, energy for approval, focus for distraction. And most people never realize what they're trading away until they're exhausted, resentful, and stuck. Greg McKeown says something that makes people uncomfortable. If you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. And they won't do it with your best interest in mind. They'll do it based on their urgency, their goals, their needs. Which is why learning to say no isn't selfish. It's survival. But here's the problem. Most people think saying no means being rude, cold, or unhelpful. It doesn't. Essentialists don't say no harshly. They say no clearly. Because clarity is kindness. Instead of long explanations, they use simple boundaries. Thanks for thinking of me, but I can't commit to that. I'm at capacity right now. This isn't the right time. No drama, no guilt, no over-justifying, just honesty. And here's something surprising. People respect boundaries more than availability. When you say yes to everything, your yes loses value. But when your yes is rare and intentional, it means something. Now let's talk about something even harder. Uncommitting. This is where most people stay trapped. They stay in jobs they hate, projects that drain them, relationships that no longer fit. Why? Because of the sunk cost fallacy. I've already invested so much time. I can't walk away now. I've come too far. But essentialists ask a different question. If I weren't already committed to this, would I choose it again today? If the answer is no, it's time to let go. Not because you failed, but because you grew. Holding on to something that no longer aligns with you doesn't make you loyal. It makes you stuck. And this is where essentialism becomes emotional. Because letting go means grieving. Grieving expectations. Grieving old versions of yourself. Grieving paths you thought you'd walk forever. But here's the quiet reward on the other side. When you remove what isn't essential, you create space. And space is where clarity lives. Space is where creativity returns, where energy comes back, where life starts to feel intentional again. You stop feeling pulled in 100 directions. You stop ending days wondering what you actually accomplished. Because now, your actions line up with your values. McKeown ends the book with a powerful reminder. Essentialism isn't about doing less for the sake of less. It's about doing less, but better. It's about making your highest contribution instead of your widest effort. And here's the real transformation. You stop being busy. You start being effective. You stop reacting. You start choosing. You stop living by default. You start living by design. So let me ask you something personal. Right now, in your life, what is one thing you're doing that costs you more than it gives? And what would happen if you had the courage to let it go? Not next year, not someday, soon. Because the life you want isn't hidden in doing more. It's hidden in doing less, with intention. And if this message hit something in you, if it made you pause, if it made you uncomfortable in the right way, don't just scroll, subscribe. Because clarity isn't a one-time realization. It's a practice. And the more you protect what matters, the more your life starts to feel like yours again. Less noise, more meaning. That's the power of saying no.